Must one remain forever despondent in the light of the prospects of gaining a dialectical advantage over Nietzsche's image of the Dionysiac superiority over the Apollonian? Or is there some reason for Ermutigung or to become encouraged with this problem? Let's suppose, without any proof for the moment, that Heidegger begins with this division and what's being under false pretenses called correlation by Nietszche and these other type of people. In my opinion, they haven't the slightest idea what they're talking about, although in other words, they simply find there's some problem of access to the world in a Kantian sense, and then they make a few moves, and then they declare Heidegger is involved in a correlation, and they assign it some character, but it's not what Heidegger has in mind. But that's I'm not making any attempt to prove that. That doesn't matter for what we're talking about. But let's instead try to sketch a version of what Nietzsche has in mind here. So let's say the first point is the Dionysiac is the god the only god who doesn't have a face, doesn't have a special face. So Achilles has a special face. He's always this sulky, angry individual who's constantly involved in trying to prove himself and trying to prove his superiority over Agamemnon, or it's exact so far as the geometry of it, so far as the triangle has an exact relationship to a square or any geometrical relationship. It's exact, although it's not at all in the most impressive personalities, not in the largest scale personalities, as Homer shows as the Iliad shows. I don't want to say Homer because there's all kinds of questions over whether the rhapsodes have written this going along, as the Milman-Parry theory says, or whether there's original Homer, or whether some version of the two. Let's forget about that. But in the very popular film, Nicholas Myers, I think, was one of the main writers and the director of it. Wrath of Khan, you could see that what was in that earlier Star Trek episode between Montalban and William Shatner is being played out on a larger scale, and the point is the cosmic rage of Achilles, but as somebody who has an Achilles-type personality, Montalban, so that he can, the typic is correct. So then you have Achilles constantly against the much more centered William Shatner, Apollo. Apollo is absolutely centered. That's his strength. But he has but the weakness is then, from this point of view, that he has a very specific character, which we could think, let's make one transfer of meaning and say the certainty that one assigns to Cartesian, the second Cartesian substance, the extended substance, the certainty that's assigned to it is the Apollonian factor. And then you have this overblown ego, which is actually an inferiority complex, constant and unbalanced character, constantly angry about everything in the whole world, and then he fixates on the Apollonian type, the Captain Kirk character, and then you have this contest. And then let's set that off against the Dionysian. So the point of the Dionysiac is that it's a composite theories. So the point is, its resentfulness isn't like the resentfulness of somebody who has an inferiority complex. So the Jung, for instance, says the problems with the Germans is the Germans have an inferiority complex, then therefore, not exactly like Achilles, but in a somewhat analogous way, they say, oh, we're the Superman. And then they get into all kinds of trouble and Gotterdammerung and so on, because of imbalance of the ego, let's say. But the difference is with the Dionysiac, their resentment, their attack on the highest principle is dangerous. So Nietzsche talks about this most dangerous and mendacious moment in universal history, mocking the idea of Hegel's Apollonian or rationalistic certainty that we've come to the end of history. But this is one certainty that's been established in the Apollonian fashion. Not that Hegel is himself particularly, or in any, Hegel himself is more like in the direction of Poseidon, I would say. But roughly in that direction, which is a kind of like Trump is like that a little bit, and Zizek is like that a little bit. I think the whole type, but that doesn't really matter for the main thing. The point of the Dionysiac is what makes them dangerous, according to Nietzsche, is that they can overturn the highest value successfully and it's basically, they're the only ones that can carry off making the theoretical man into something practical, as it were. So Nietzsche's whole, in the way then in this light we could see Dionysiac becomes another name for like almost William James type of William James type of pragmatism of the analytic philosophy. It's almost like analytic philosophy. It's almost the same as analytic philosophy. It's like the theory, even if not true, can be important for clarifying and directing our action. Like that statement by that mathematician who died young, I forget his name, among the British. So we have a juxtaposition of the most mendacious and most dangerous type, the Dionysiac type, against the other types which have a certainty to them, but in such a way that it brings out that the type which is establishing the certainty is alive, and therefore we break down into, we can no longer we get all the problems associated with mere pragmatism, as the saying, which, let's just end this by saying, before there could be a concrete distinction between an axiom or an arche, axiom and arche, I'm making the same, something totally, like archetype, something totally in place. So supposing that the notion of parallel lines has no empirical part. It's not something that at some moment in time it's true, you test it. It's not something like encouragement or discouragement or being despondent or being elated. which comes in time and then passes. It's not in time, it's an axiom. Whereas there's another thing which we could call a mere postulate, or something like the way we understand the theory of evolution. It might not be absolutely true. It might break down, and Hamilton shows that it can break down, right? Because it brings out the problem of the altruism, and then the theory, and then the theoretical status of fitness doesn't seem to quite make sense anymore, right? It's something that's subject. So the postulate is something I want to, for this meaning, is something that's subject to change. It's alive in a way, but it's nonetheless, if we regard theory of evolution as a postulate, it still does something, right? Whereas the axiom was supposed to be like an archetype forever. That's where we get this Apollonian versus Dionysius action.